Elliot, we hear it thrown out a lot, either when you're watching a match or when you were playing in a match. Intent. I didn't mean to. His hand was. He meant to do that with his hand. He meant to do that with his body. It's a big fight that you hear with what intent means, how intent is applied to the rule. When it comes to reffing, where does intent actually fit in?
Well, luckily for refs, we have a hard enough job, and we're not required to be mind readers. So as referees, we're not required to look at a player's intent. We're required to look at a player's actions. What do they actually do? And I think one of the issues is that intent and deliberate actions are treated synonymously, and they're not. And they're not supposed to be treated synonymously. They have different meanings. So intent, we're looking at a player and what their intended outcome is. In the context of the laws of the game, when we're looking at a deliberate action, we're looking at the physicality of what a player does. So for a foul, it's the point of contact, the object of contact, the speed, the velocity, the timing, not what the player meant. And for handballs, was there a deliberate touch of the ball by the arm, or was there a move by the player to make their arm put their arm in an unnatural position? So the good news for refs is we're not looking at reading the player's mind, figuring out what they meant. We're looking at the physicality of what a player does.
We'll go to a clip here in a second that kind of really, there's been a play that happened pretty recently in the Premier League that kind of really shows this of intent and kind of where it changes it with the foul going one direction or the other. Andrew, though, from a player's perspective, when you're throwing out the word intent to defend yourself, or when you hear that word intent, how are you guys reading that as far as when you are possibly committing a foul?
Well, as a player, you can read your own mind, which in your own mind is incredibly valid. So when you're attempting to play the ball and you feel that you get it and that your motivation was, in the right place, it's very frustrating when a foul is called on you. In the heat of the moment, it's difficult to sit there and go, well, my intent was good, but I lacked control. So you know what? The ref's probably right. So it's a challenging thing for players to keep in mind, especially in the heat of the moment. But it is important, I think, for players, as much as I want to defend them, it is important to remember that, like, at the end of the day, a referee is officiating for control because their job is to keep the match safe and professional and make sure everyone is following the laws, and they can't really consider whether your motivation was in the right place or not. So I would just like to remind players that at the end of the day, it's about control. So if you meant to get the ball but you clipped the opposing player, or you accidentally ran into a player, or whatever it is, that's still a foul.
So the play that is now kind of the recent touch point for this conversation, Newcastle, West Ham, Vladimir Kafal, Anthony Gordon in the Newcastle attacking half in the box. They're both going for the ball. Anthony Gordon kind of stepping in front. He obviously then gets hit by Kafal, or they collide. He goes down. The penalty is called. It goes to review, and it stands. Elliot, how did you read this one?
Firstly, this is a good example of demonstrating that intent was not relevant. It's easy to watch that clip and agree that Koufal's eyes were on the ball. He took a swing of the leg, thinking, I'm just going to poke this ball away. And in the split second before his own foot makes connection with the ball, across comes Gordon, and instead of kicking the ball, he's kicking Gordon. No intent, we can agree. And so we're looking at the physicality of this. The case in favor of giving the penalty is that Anthony Gordon got to the space first. He got to the space between Koufal and the ball. He's not touching or playing the ball, but he's allowed to get to that space, and he's protecting the ball. And having gotten to that space a fraction of a second before Kufal, in comes the contact, and he gets kicked. So that's the case for Gordon being awarded the penalty. I know that there is strong opinion on both sides of the fence, but if I had to advocate for the penalty, that would be the best case I can put forward.
Andrew, you kind of saw this
yeah.
Rorschach test the other way. You have a lot of sympathy for Kafal in this case.
Yeah, absolutely do. For me, this is I disagree. I think this is 100% a foul on Gordon. In fact, I think it's pretty clear. There's a few different ways to look at it, as Elliot has mentioned. For me, Gordon not looking at the ball, not playing the ball, in fact, going by the ball and making contact with Kufal, in my opinion, he lacked the control. Again, a 10 is not irrelevant. He lacked the control and put Kufal in danger and himself in danger, which is exactly the laws are written to avoid that. So for me, I think this is very clear. I think he made the contact with Kufal because as much as Kufal was striking towards the ball, Anthony Gordon was making a very similar motion, missed the ball and struck, or he didn't really strike, but maybe kind of went past Kufal, which caused the initial physical touch, and then he actually kind of clipped him at the end as his foot came across. So for me, I think this is pretty obvious. But this is just one example. There's also different examples where a player, Kufal is kind of poking towards the ball. He's not in a full, with his leg back and then moving forward to strike the ball from a standing position. There's a lot of examples of that too. And I personally, this is not how the laws are currently written, but I would strongly advocate that the laws need to be written that once a player is in their ball striking motion, the opposing player cannot enter into that space. And if they do, then they kind of forfeit their right to that space because I just think that's dangerous for everyone involved. And I don't really see how that benefits the game by allowing players to just step in front of the ball striking motion and get kicked and both players are injured and no one gets the ball. By the letter of the law, that's currently the way it's written, that would be a foul on the player making the ball striking motion, but it just doesn't seem fair to anyone, and it's certainly not promoting safety. So, this is definitely in my opinion, it's a very frustrating decision. I can see why it's called. I see Elliot's point. He gets to the space first, but I do think there's further context there. Like, why was he in that space? Is it, was he, did he really have the right to that space? And I don't think he did. So that's how I see it. I really do feel for Kafal.
Can actions dictate intent, Elliot?
Possibly. I mean, yes. The answer is yes. But for a referee, our job is to stick to the actions. If you're a coach, then you can coach a player about what should they do, what should they avoid. You can tell them, help guide them about their intentions and what's a good tactical play. For the referee, it's the actions. We might have an opinion about what a player meant, but it's just an opinion, and it doesn't form part of a referee's decision-making process. It might affect the way we manage a situation, the way we talk to a player afterwards. So if I were to advise our Gotham refs, it's actually quite a good opportunity to show empathy towards a player. If you want to get them on your side and maybe sell the foul, you want to call a foul, but you might say, hey, player, for what it's worth, I know your eyes were on the ball and it was just mistimed, or you just caught him. It's an opportunity to show the player you're not judging their intent. In fact, I agree that the player, you had the right intent. You did go for the ball, but nevertheless, it's a foul. So in a way, you can manage the situation to soften the blow of having to blow the whistle, call a foul against the player. Andrew quite articulately mentioned earlier how frustrating that can be for a player when in your own mind, you saw the ball, you tried to get the ball, you didn't mean to kick the ball, and then hearing that referee's whistle is quite frustrating. To have the ref say, hey, player, don't worry, I got you. Nothing bad there, just a trip. So that can help keep the temperature of a game low.
hot button issue is always ground challenges, especially in recreational level, especially here at Gotham, where it's obviously we judge it and govern it differently than you would at a professional level. When it comes to a ground challenge, a slide, a lunge, my foot slipped. Andrew, what's our current rule, and then how do we see that possibly evolving here?
Yeah, so the current verbiage for our slide tackling rule reads as slide tackles are not permitted in certain divisions. When applied, outfield players are permitted to slide to save the ball from going out of bounds or to block or save a shot, provided there's no opponent within playing distance of the ball. A slide tackle infraction results in a direct free kick. Now, for the summer of 2024 and going forward, we are proposing a slight change. There's a change to the name of the law, which is going to be changed from no slide tackling to no ground challenges. So we're completely removing slide tackles, which of course is included in ground challenges, but now it's going to kind of encompass a little bit more, which is essentially how it's been officiated anyway, but we're making this more formal because there's some good reasons for it, which I'll get into in a second, but it's no ground challenges instead of no slide tackles. And this new proposal reads as ground challenges are not permitted. A ground challenge includes any slide, lunge, or attempt on the ball while on the ground. This law is applied when a player is making one of these movements within playing distance and toward an opponent. There's exceptions for certain divisions and tournaments that we have. There's also an exception for goalkeepers as long as they are making a goalkeeper movement. But what we're trying to do here is encompass more officially lunges and playing the ball while on the ground. Now, playing the ball on the ground is already somewhat encompassed within dangerous play, but we're making this a little bit more concrete and just saying, do not play the ball on the ground whatsoever. If there's anyone near you, please get up before you begin playing the ball. And now the reason that we're doing this is ultimately it's safety. Lunges and slide tackles and playing the ball on the ground have a much higher degree of risk, I suppose would be a good way to put it. There's a much higher chance of committing a foul that leads to an injury. We've been playing, and it's not just Gotham. I think small-sided leagues across the country have been playing without slide tackles, and really some of these other movements as well for a very long time. I've been playing small-sided for a long time, and we've had some really, really competitive matches without slide tackling. It's just not really necessary, so it's definitely worth avoiding and just removing from the small-sided game specifically, and the recreational 11s as well. And now the reason we're including lunges, as I think probably many would ask, is when you lunge, and what we're really looking for as a referee is when you lunge and you commit your body weight to the ground, you're really forfeiting your ability to quickly move out of the way. You're forfeiting your mobility, which is putting both yourself and the opposing player in a dangerous position. And it's really no different than a slide tackle. It may not look as bad, but it's the aesthetic aside, it's still a dangerous movement that we're looking to avoid.
And from a reffing standpoint, this kind of takes away some of the gray area, right?
Yes. The argument in favor of keeping this nice and simple and clear wording is that it takes away the gray area of deciding whether a player was slightly down, a little bit down, in favor of simplicity and safety. Yes, we're casting a wider net, and our job is to make it easy for our refs to understand, easy for players to understand, express that the reason behind it is safety, and yes, exactly, it's to take away the gray areas.
Elliot, so this happens, it gets called. How do you think that the resumption of the game should go?
So currently, any slide tackle, any ground challenge, let's use the new verbiage, any ground challenge that it's proposed that the restart is a direct free kick, or if it's committed by a defender inside their own penalty area, a penalty kick. So the good thing about that, it's a very clear disincentive for players to go to ground and commit a challenge. The issue that I have with it is that there are some circumstances where a direct free kick, or especially a penalty, might be a disproportionately harsh outcome for the offence that's being committed. So to take an extreme example, might be a player who finds themselves on the ground through reasons other than that they were fouled to be there. So they're on the ground, maybe they slipped, they find themselves on the ground in playing distance of the ball. An opponent is standing up, also in playing distance of the ball. The grounded player from their grounded position sticks out a leg and plays the ball. We deem it a ground challenge. It's in the area. It's a penalty. I would say that a penalty is a harsh outcome because our reason for the ground challenges rule is safety. And I don't think safety is an issue in that quite specific situation. And so I'd be in favor of taking away a little bit of sacrificing some simplicity in order to be able to reach a more nuanced decision. So if the ground challenge doesn't involve contact, then the result could be an indirect free kick. Hopefully that would still be enough of a deterrence to stop players committing ground challenges without being too punitive in awarding a penalty against someone who was by no means putting somebody else's safety at risk. So you're sacrificing a little bit of simplicity. You're maybe creating a little bit more of a grey area, but you're taking away a possible harsh outcome. Now I know Andrew is more in favour of the simplicity and making it black and white, calling everything direct free kick and penalties. What I'd be in favour of at the very least is maybe picking one of our divisions, doesn't matter which city it is or whether it's 5-a-side, 7-a-side, picking one division, trialing the choice of restarts between direct and indirect free kick, give it a go for a season, see how it goes. Do the referees cope with that level of complexity? Is it still enough of a deterrence against ground challenges? And the feedback that we get can determine whether we find that a worthwhile experiment or not. Certainly the risk, in the hands of experienced referees, I would trust them to be able to handle that level of nuance. Referees are already required to determine between impeding with contact, direct free kick, impeding without contact, indirect free kick, kicking a player, attempts to kick a player, dangerous play with or without contract. So it's a level of nuance I think experienced referees can already cope with.
Andrew?
Yeah, so as Elliot illustrated, I'm more on the side of simplicity. At Gotham, that's how we've approached creating the laws or the exceptions to the laws. It's always been about simplicity. We have very few exceptions, really. This happens to be one of them. For the most part, we stick to IFAB and FIFA. Yeah, I'm certainly in favor of simplicity. I'm also in favor of incentivizing players to simply not commit ground challenges. For me, I like to make things as easy as possible on our referees. I also like to make things as simple for our players as possible. We could talk about this all day, but and we can post this on social media and send out email blasts, but probably only about 5 to 10% of our players are going to bother to even pay attention to it anyway. So I've got concerns about making the law any more complicated than it is. But I certainly understand Elliot's perspective that it could be slightly disproportionate. It could really have nothing to do with safety, even though that's what the law is written for. So I think Elliot certainly has some valid points. So yeah, it could go either way. And one of these days Elliot will be back and maybe he'll be able to test it out himself.
Give me that chance.